This message is brought to you by House on the Rock Fellowship. We're a church that serves and cares for the Miami Valley region in Ohio. Before you continue, make sure to access the notes from our download section of our message page and have your Bible ready. Thank you for being our guest.
Who's that? One of the most recognizable, most distinguishable, most copied, most plagiarized, most valuable paintings in the whole world. The Mona Lisa, estimated value $1 billion. $1 billion. We've seen it, we make movies about it, we write songs about it. But what I started to wonder was, how do you take care of a painting like that? $1 billion. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people come by every single day to see it. It's really important that you frame it correctly, to preserve it, to keep it. In fact, many, many, many people have thought long and hard, how do you preserve and protect and frame the Mona Lisa? Because a frame is important. A frame will protect the painting, the artwork. It protects it from abuse. It protects it from being mishandled. It keeps it safe. The Mona Lisa is actually in a hermetically sealed case behind glass barrier, so it stays at a very specific humidity level and temperature level. It's actually painted on a poplar panel. It's not painted on canvas. And so it's very susceptible to warping. So they've had to think through a lot. How do we keep this safe? How do we preserve this? A frame helps protect it. A frame is also how you anchor it, how you get it up so that you can access it, so that you can see it and experience it. A frame, though, can also add to or take away from your artistic experience as you look at a painting. Let me give you another example beyond the Mona Lisa. Oh, hi, my name's Paul. How are you? Okay. Take this painting as an example. It's not just the framing, a wood framing, but the artist thought, what if we added a gilded trim, that gold trim? And what that does is that actually draws your eye to those more vibrant golden colors in the sunrise on that painting. A frame matters, but you can get it wrong. Here's another example, okay? Same painting, two different frames. Okay? You can see on that side, oh, that makes sense. It's just kind of, I see the deer. But on this one, it's really hard to notice the painting because what do you see the whole time? You're just looking at the frame. It's about the painting. It's not about the frame. Let me show you one more example how a frame can do a lot for you. The artist, she's the one who painted this beautiful abstract. She had a conversation with the frame designer, and they decided, what if they added this red trim on the inside of that frame to help pull out and accentuate some of those red colors? A frame makes a big, big difference. Why do I say all that? Why do I bring all of that up? Because we're not going to talk about the Mona Lisa, the most significant painting, piece of art in the world, $1 billion. We're going to talk about the most significant moral, theological document ever given to humanity, the Sermon on the Mount. In fact, we're going to spend much of our year in 3 chapters in Matthew. Matthew 5, 6, and 7. We set aside 39 weeks to slow down and talk about the Sermon on the Mount. One theologian, his name is Scott McKnight, had this to say about the Sermon on the Mount. He's a theologian I respect very much. The Sermon on the Mount remains the greatest moral document of all time. And I started thinking and working on this series back in June. And I have come to believe those very words are very, very true. All right, so let's frame it well. Let's today our goal is simply that, to give ourselves a framework so that we can understand the Sermon on the Mount better And some of you who know me know I like to draw pictures. So today we're going to draw some pictures. You guys like to do drawings? I like to do drawings. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a mountain, right? All right, and let's go from there. That's a volcano. There. Now it's a mountain. Context for the Sermon on the Mount. Because a frame will add to my experience. A frame helps protect the document. A frame helps anchor the document so I know how to experience it. A frame will help draw out things that are in that artwork so that I can understand it better. Okay? So, what do I need to know about the Sermon on the Mount before we really dive into it? You want to take it in its context. Where is it in Matthew? It's in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew actually works really hard to help us understand the Sermon on the Mount long before we ever get there. There's a way that Matthew wants us to see it. Frame it, if you will. He has someone in the Old Testament in mind that he wants us to think about. Maybe if I bring up some highlights at the beginning of Matthew's gospel, they might resonate with somebody else in the Old Testament you might recognize. An example, okay? Just coming out of Matthew 1, 2, 3, and 4. Was there an individual in the Old Testament that experienced a miraculous birth? Is there someone in the Old Testament that spent time in Egypt? Is there someone in the Old Testament who, when they were born, lots of other babies were killed at the same time too? Is there someone in the Old Testament who did a lot of delivering work through some water? Is there someone in the Old Testament who spent a lot of time in the wilderness? Is there someone in the Old Testament who climbed up a mountain and received some important things from God? Is there someone in the Old Testament who, when they were in God's presence, came down glowing? Who is it? Moses. Exactly. While it sounds like we were talking about Moses, what we just unpacked was the beginning of Matthew. Because it's really important that Matthew, that we think of Jesus as a new Moses. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a frame. Okay? Okay, so in your notes, okay, let's just draw a line here, okay? Okay, we're going to start building a frame. New Moses. You could even take the book of Deuteronomy and put it next to the book of Matthew. And Deuteronomy and Matthew are structured much the same way. Deuteronomy follows 5 big sermons of Moses. And in Matthew's gospel, he lays out that gospel with 5 main speeches. We're going to look at the first one this year in the Sermon on the Mount. He wants us to see that Jesus is a new Moses. The history of Israel is about the priority of Moses. Moses, who was the great deliverer. Moses, who went up the mountain to get God's law and God's instruction. In fact, if anybody is going to do anything to transform Israel, it's going to have to be someone who's like Moses. Moses, who climbed up on the mountain to see, because that's what you can do on a mountain. You can see far and wide. What did he see? He saw a promised land. He saw another place. He saw deliverance. It was all about bringing people out of Egypt and setting them free. In fact, here's a very important passage. This is in Exodus chapter 19. If you wanted to look at it later, I'll read it through with you. This is verses 1 through 6. On the 3rd new moon after the people of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on that day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. They set out from the Rephidim and came into the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in the wilderness. There Israel encamped before the mountain, while Moses went up to God, and the Lord called to him out of the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, to the people of Israel, You yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians, how I bore you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you shall be my treasured possession among the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests, a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the people of Israel. This section of scripture in Exodus, this point in Israel's history, it's their defining moment. It's their deliverance. It's their 4th of July. It's freedom. This is about we have left bondage and slavery. We've come through waters of deliverance. Now Moses is ushering us into something new. He's going to take us a promise. Matthew needs us, wants us to understand that when Jesus steps onto that mountain, he's the new Moses. He's the one who's leading people out of bondage. He's the one who's setting people free. He's the one who has this prophetic vision on the mountain to see far and to see wide and to see beyond the chaos and beyond the corruption and beyond all that's down below, to see where we need to be. This is what we're welcomed into as we begin the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is a new Moses, a deliverer. So you building that frame? Building that frame? All right. Not just a new Moses, okay? Because what did Moses get when he was up on the mountain? Anyone know? Yeah, 10 Commandments. Awesome. We got a whole lot more than that, but it started with the 10 Commandments, right? All right. So it's not just a new Moses, but it's a new law. New law, L-A-W. To read the Sermon on the Mount is to read a new law. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. This is how the Sermon on the Mount begins. Matthew chapter 5, verse 1. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. All right, so he's on the mountain, but there's this thing about him sitting down. Is that significant? Well, Matthew is a Jewish writer writing about a Jewish rabbi to Jewish people. Sitting down means something. To say that Jesus sat down is to say he's about getting ready to teach. He's going to lay down the law. In our Western culture, okay, right here, if you were to walk in and we took a snapshot of this image and you would ask, all right, who's the speaker? How would they be able to identify me? I'm the one who's standing up, right? Well, in Jewish synagogues, it's backwards. When the rabbi is ready to speak, he goes and he sits down. There's an example of this in Luke chapter 4. Let me read it for you. A couple of verses in Luke chapter 4. And this is about Jesus. Jesus rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. And the eyes of all the synagogue were fixed on him. We would read sit down like he's done doing his thing. Sitting down means he's getting ready to start. He's getting ready to teach. It says he's going to open his mouth in verse 2, and he's going to teach them. What is he going to teach them? He's going to give them new law, new Torah. To help us understand that, you actually have to go to the very end of the Sermon on the Mount. Okay? A little bit of a bookend. In Matthew chapter 7, verses 28 and 29, this is what comes at the end. Okay? For Jesus was teaching them as one who has authority, not as their scribes. Authority. Many scribes and rabbis, when they would get up, would say what they're going to say in reference to somebody else who already said it. Okay? So their authority was a deferred, copied authority from somebody else who had more authority than them. Jesus gets up to speak, and they're like, he's not quoting anybody else. He's not referring to anybody else. He's taking this up. He's speaking with authority himself. He is a new Moses with a new law that's been brought down on the mountain. In the same way that Moses brought the 10 Commandments down, he is coming with a new law given to us. We call it a sermon. They're not suggestions. This is not the suggestions on the Mount. These aren't the tips on the Mount. These aren't the theological ideas to a better self on the Mount. It's a sermon, not an essay. Jesus is expecting us to obey it. He's expecting us to follow it. I had a woman in the first service come up to me and she said, Pastor, I'm kind of concerned about the next 39 weeks. I feel like I should be wearing steel-toed boots to these sermons. I don't know what Jesus is going to say, and I don't think I'm going to be ready for it. I'm like, no, I don't think any of us are ready for what Jesus is going to say to us. He's going to say some very difficult things. Can I give you an example? This book, Following the Call, is a collection of over 100 different Christian writers and theologians. There's an example of it over by my office. Some life groups are going to be using this. This is a great way to supplement your study this year. It's laid out for 52 weeks. You can just read other people as they experience the Sermon on the Mount. But George MacDonald was a writer and a thinker in the 1800s. How many of you like Lord of the Rings? Yeah, and I knew you did. Because everyone who likes Lord of the Rings, make sure that everybody knows that you like Lord of the Rings. C.S. Lewis, Chronicles of Narnia. Okay, those guys, Tolkien, Lewis, look back to George MacDonald as the founder and the beginner of that style of writing. So George was reflecting on Matthew chapter 7, verses 21 to 23, where Jesus says this. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Only the one who does the will of my Father in heaven. Many will say to me on that day, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? In your name drive out demons, and in your name perform miracles. Then I will tell them plainly, I never knew you. Away from me, evil doer. Well, that's kind of harsh. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord. How many of you said Lord before? Lord, Lord. Everyone say that? Lord, Lord. Everyone say Lord, Lord. Okay, yeah. Not everyone who says that will enter the kingdom. Only the one who does the will of my Father. With that in mind, this is what George wrote. Do you ask, what is faith in him? I answer. The leaving of your way, your objects, yourself, the taking of his and him, the leaving of your trust in men, in money, in opinion, in character, in atonement itself, and doing as he tells you. I can find no words strong enough to serve for the weight of this necessity, this obedience. It is the one terrible heresy of the church, that it has always been presenting something else than obedience as faith in Christ. Get up. Do something that the master tells you. So make yourself his disciple at once. Instead of asking yourself whether you believe or not, ask yourself whether you have this day done one thing he said. Do it. Or at once abstain because he said, don't do it. It is simply absurd to say you believe, or even want to believe, if you do not do anything he tells you to do. We must learn to obey in everything, and so must begin somewhere. Let it be at once, in the very next thing that lies at the door of our conscience. Oh, fools, slow of heart, if you think nothing but Christ, do not set yourselves to do his words. And you do not set yourself to do his words, you are building your house on sand. Ouch. This new law, it's new law. So what has happened over 2,000 years is we have worked really hard to reframe Jesus' instructions, to resand and reposition and recolor them so they don't feel as ouchy as they actually are. One tradition, one way of looking at the Sermon on the Mount are those who say the Sermon on the Mount is really like a high definition mirror. It's just the sermon's job to show you how much you can't follow the law. We don't expect you to, nor does Jesus expect you to follow it. It's just there to show you how much you can't follow it. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Like Jesus is doing some secret Kansas City two-step bait and switch. Listen, I'm going to tell them to do it, but they don't know they can't do it until they try to do it, and then they can't. Maybe he says it, and he actually expects us to do it. Well, that's hard. Well, yeah. I mean, I've watched how some of you follow the speed limit. I can't wait till you hit some of these verses in Matthew chapter 6 and 7. This will be a hoot. So some just say, you know what? It's just setting up, this whole be perfect as I am perfect, love your enemies. It's just Jesus' way of saying we can't follow the rules. That doesn't fit. For others, they've framed the Sermon on the Mount as a way of saying it's designed for a private morality. It's just for you to work out how to follow God and to kind of guide you privately, individually. Well, here's the problem with that. That's not how he frames it. It's about an us. It's a we. It's a discipleship. It's a group. It's a community. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespass. This us language, this we language. He's creating a community. He's creating a people. This is not an individual thing. You cannot obey the Sermon on the Mount if you're not walking in community, which makes walking in community and the Ten Commandments and the Sermon on the Mount really hard for Americans. It's about creating an us. It's not a private thing. Some people look at this Sermon on the Mount and say, you know what? It's really just kind of for super Christians. I mean, it's for those who really follow, like the Pope or like priests and pastors and nuns and old people that love Jesus super much. It's like for super followers. That's who the sermon's for. Well, there's a problem with that. It says he went up on the mountain and his disciples came to him. Not the super disciples. Not the good disciples. Not the disciples who've been doing it a long time. The disciples. Which makes this the governing law for those who say they follow Jesus, whether or not we're following it well or not. Others set the Sermon on the Mount completely aside and say, you know what? You really shouldn't be thinking about the Sermon on the Mount until you've hung out with Paul for a while. The Apostle Paul, not me, okay? It's really more about grace. You really should be focusing on grace. Grace, because we're not under law, and you really can't talk about that until you know some more about grace. So once you get grace, then you can start talking about the Sermon on the Mount. If Jesus thought that, then he would have preached it after Paul and not before Paul. Apparently, Jesus thinks he has enough authority and expectation to speak to us directly and not through the filter of the Apostle Paul. I think we need to take it exactly for what it is. Framed in the understanding that he's a new Moses. And this is a new law with all of its authority that comes with it. And I've alluded to this already. We have a new Moses, okay? That's what you see from the mountain. We have a new law, okay? God coming down. But another side, it's making a new people. Making a new people, okay? They came up the mountain, okay? They came up the mountain to him. A new people. There's a boots on the ground kind of language in the Sermon on the Mount that makes it accessible to all of us. For those of us who wear flannels and t-shirts and those who go to work on Monday morning and try real hard all week. There's an expectation that this is for an everybody kind of people. But he's making a new people. A new Moses with a new law for a new people. It's not an all people. Carmen, could you bring up Matthew 5, verse 1 again? This is how it starts, okay? Matthew 5, verse 1. I know, I did it out of order. It's okay. Did you find it? It's after the Exodus one. Seeing the crowds, okay, see that crowds part? He went up on the mountain. When he sat down, the disciples came to him. So yeah, there is very much a crowds part. There's very much in everybody down here doing their thing. Oh yeah, that's a nice painting. That's really cool. But out of the crowds comes a people, which means there's an in and there's an out. There's a follower and a not follower. Do these things, and your life is a house built on a rock. Don't do them, you're a fool. A new people, which means, yes, there's a priority for grace and the importance of the Holy Spirit helping me and abiding in me every single day, because this is weighty. This is a big deal. He's creating a new kingdom space because this is heaven come to earth. In fact, again and again and again, I took the Sermon on the Mount and I printed out on one big sheet. Okay, I found the biggest sheet of paper that we had back in the office, and I laid it out so I could see the whole thing at once. Just not, page after another page after another page. I want to see the whole thing. And what you can see all throughout it, all over the place, is Jesus using this one phrase again and again and again. The kingdom of heaven is this. The kingdom of heaven is this. The kingdom of heaven is this. Because here we are, boots on the ground, walking earth every single day, but now we're going to become an overlap. We're going to become a different kind of space, a new place, a new people where the kingdom can be experienced. And when people do that, when his new people under his new law do that, he says, you know what it's like? It's like a city on a hill. It's a city that's set on a hill. A theologian by the name of Stanley Hauerwas had some reflections on this. I want to share a couple of them with you. Go ahead, Carmen. The sermon is the reality of the new age made possible in time. Meaning what? Many of us are looking for Jesus to come back so he can make everything better, right? In the Sermon on the Mount, we see the manifestation of that kingdom now. It's the kingdom now. It's the new age now. We don't have to wait for it. He says again in another place, Jesus' life is a commentary on the sermon. The sermon is the exemplification of his life. So if I'm wanting to be more like Jesus, what Stanley says is the sermon explains his life. And his life is the illustration of the sermon. So the more I become like Jesus, the more I will be living out the Sermon on the Mount. Does that change it from being hard? It's going to be hard. It's going to be tough. You're going to kick and scream, and there's going to be Sundays where you're going to leave here saying, this is dumb. And some of you won't even be here when the year ends. You'll have decided to move on. That this isn't the right place for you. The Lord bless you. The Lord keep you. The Lord cause his face to shine upon you. And some of you will kick and scream, and like me, we'll have to pull our big boy pants on and try again. And we'll experience God's grace and Jesus' forgiveness. But a new people, living a new law under a new Moses. There's one other part that goes here, right? We got one side, we have another side, we have another side. There's supposed to be another one that goes here. And if I put that other one there, I've created a picture frame, right? I know, I'm trying my hardest. It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I know. Nap time. Oh, yeah. If I put another one down here, what have we created? We've created a frame. We've created a picture frame. But if we do that, you know what I'm afraid of? Many of us will treat the Sermon on the Mount the way we've always treated the Sermon on the Mount. It's a portrait. It's a window. It's something that we can look at in the museum and appreciate. Like, wow, that's really cool what Jesus said there. That's really neat what Jesus put there. I like what he said there. Wasn't too crazy about these colors and that thing. But you know what? That's nice. And then we can keep walking like we do at another museum and look and appreciate another painting. It's a window. It's not a door. It's a portrait. It's not a portal. Many of us treat the Sermon on the Mount like that. It's something that we can recognize and appreciate. But you know what? I like the things that Paul said better. Or Revelation, man, that's some really fun stuff. I just like reading the Psalms. Those are cool. They make me, you know, when I'm sad, I read some Psalms. What if we kept that bottom part off? What do you have when you frame something like this? What is it? Yeah. What if we saw an opportunity to step into a new reality, a new people, a new law? What if we decided to leave the crowd? What if we decided to climb up and join him? What if we learned to receive this Torah come down from God? What if we learned in the Sermon on the Mount to see a greater vision of a promise yet to come? What if we learned to live this wisdom every day, at lunch, at work, when we're doing the laundry? Some of us here are crowd sitters, and that's where you're going to stay. You have absolutely no interest whatsoever in Jesus telling you what to do. You're here because he dragged you or she dragged you. I respect that. I'm glad that you're here. The Sermon on the Mount will give you the gift of location. It will solidify that in your mind. You won't be allowed to fake it anymore. You won't be allowed to rationalize away things like baptism and the Lord's table. You won't be able to rationalize away things like your pornography addiction or your alcoholism or the way you talk to your spouse. It's going to hit you right in the face. That's the gift that it gives you, location. It lets you know where you are. It says you're not a disciple. You're not even close to a disciple. Sure, you gather and say, Lord, Lord, with the rest of them. You ain't got a clue. What a gift of his grace that he would let you know that. Better to find out now. Some of us, we are disciples and we know that. But you know what our problem is? We have a lot to learn. We really need to stop screwing up. In fact, the history of the Sermon on the Mount is us trying to soften the edges and sand the corners so it goes down a little bit easier. There was a Jewish Orthodox theologian who said something along the same lines. Go ahead, Carmen. Bring up Pinchas's quote. In fact, the history of the impact of the Sermon on the Mount can largely be described in terms of an attempt to domesticate everything in it that is shocking, demanding, and uncompromising, and render it harmless. Harmless. Well, I know he said that, but he really meant this. And he really doesn't expect us to follow that. He's just kind of, letting us know that it's hard being human. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a theologian I great respect, wrote on the Sermon on the Mount, his book called Discipleship. I'd encourage you to get it, read it. It's powerful. When we live like that, we rob the Sermon on the Mount. We misframe and abuse the portrait for what it is. This is what Dietrich said. Its validity depends on its being obeyed. It only carries the weight that it should have to a broken, weary world when a new people actually listen to the law and walk underneath the new Moses for what it is. And the world is desperate for us to actually step up to Jesus' expectations for his disciples. They're looking for it. They need it. They're hungering for it. N.T. Wright, a theologian I really appreciate, also had this to say: the sermon isn't just about how to behave. It's about discovering the living God in the loving and dying Jesus and learning to reflect that love ourselves into the world that needs it so badly. We need to obey it. They need us to obey it. Where do we start as we are starting? As we are starting. I think for a bunch of us, it's going to be really hard to practice what he preached because we really don't know what he preached. We're not really familiar with the content. We've not spent a lot of time in the Sermon on the Mount. Maybe you've been reading along, with the church family, going through our Bible reading plan. That's great. We just read Mark 1 through 5 this week. We'll pick it up, read Mark 6 tomorrow. But what if I challenged you? What if this week we took the next 7 days to read the Sermon on the Mount 7 different ways? What if each day you read the Sermon on the Mount? Oh my goodness. That's so hard. Pastor, that's so hard. Okay. Check this out. How many of you know how long my average sermons are? On average, how long do I talk? Linda, how long? 58 minutes. It's not that bad. What's that? 38, around 45, around between 40 and 45 minutes. What my messages are, okay? Okay? Jesus' sermon. Guess how long it takes to read Jesus' sermon? 16 minutes. It's 2,000 words. 16 minutes. I have seen some of you wait in the drive-thru at that McDonald's for longer than that. Okay? I mean, come on now. So what if you set aside 16 minutes every day for the next 7 days? And we have created or in the process of rolling out what we're calling House on the Rock Neighborhood. It's another way for us to connect as a community outside of just the geography. It's a way for us to connect to each other on our phones, on our laptops, digitally, to encourage each other, to pray together, to study together. And on the back of your message guide, there's a queue where you can get connected to and subscribe. It's free to you. It's a happy resource that we're enjoying providing with our church family. Open to all. A way that we can gather around the gospel. A way that we can encourage each other. You have the app right on your phone. But within that is an area that we've created for our study on the Sermon on the Mount. You can join that. And in that, and all of you have rolled out by the time you get home, I've challenged you. Read the Sermon on the Mount 7 ways in 7 days. Each day it will prompt you. Hey, we're supposed to read it in the morning. Okay, now we're going to read it in the afternoon. Hey, now we're going to read it in community. Now I'm going to listen to it. Now I'm going to read it at lunchtime. Just this week so we can get some of those words into our head, okay? That would be my challenge to you. If you want more information about that, you can talk to me, come up afterwards, or go to the website on the back of the notes. Another way that you can experience the Sermon on the Mount, which is paramount, is within the context of community, namely life groups. Next week, the life groups are going to open back up again to welcome new people. If you're not a part of a life group, the signups will be available. Great way, because guess what? This is all about a new people. You're really going to struggle obeying the obeying the Sermon on the Mount if you're not in community. So why not join a life group? If you've joined a life group, but you don't go to it, start going to it. Big fan of that too. Like, yeah, I'm part of a life group. Like, you haven't been in 4 months. Like, yeah, but I'm part of one, whatever. Life group, and let's read it together. Let's read it together. Photographers have labeled what they call the Mona Lisa illusion. This quality. if when your picture is taken and you're looking directly at the lens at the right angle, then what will happen when someone looks at your photograph is that no matter where they are, it will look like you're looking at them. In much the same way as you experience Mona Lisa's painting, no matter where you are in the room, it looks like she's looking at you. It's quite interesting. I think the Sermon on the Mount's the exact same way. I think the more you look at the Sermon on the Mount, the more you experience the Sermon on the Mount looking at you. That the more you peer into it, the more you will find it peering into you. Nat King Cole, are you warm? Are you real, Mona Lisa? Or just a cold and lonely, lovely work of art? I'll let you decide.
Thank you for sharing your time with us, and we'd love for the journey to continue. If you're a guest, would you consider reaching out to us? We would love to come alongside and encourage you in any way that we can. If you're someone who's joined us today and you are desperately reaching to find hope wherever you can, again, Jesus came that we would find hope. You can find hope today. If you want to send us a short note, a member of our Hope team would reach out quickly, promptly, to come alongside and see what we can do to encourage you in whatever storm you might find yourself in. That's why Jesus came, and that's why we're here. Jesus said there's two ways to live your life, and a wise man, a wise woman, builds their life on Jesus' instructions. God bless.